Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. In our previous 4 classes, I discussed the main teachings of this text from the Krishna Yajurveda, ascribed to a sage known as Śvetāśvatara, whose name was Śvetashvatara, the one with the clean, purified senses, radiant senses. That's the literal meaning of the word. Just to recap a little bit, and to show its influence on the Yoga Shastra, the teaching of yoga known as the Bhagavad Gita. For him, both self-effort, what is tapas, the effort that an individual makes to save himself or herself from suffering, that effort, as well as bhakti, supreme love, devotion, as a means to acquire the grace of the divine, in other words, to be uplifted by that universal power out of suffering. Both he gives equal importance to both. We have to make our own effort as well as make ourselves worthy of that grace. And that's why he's the first master amongst the Upanishadic masters to speak of bhakti, to speak of devotion, to speak of supreme love. None of the earlier Upanishads, because if traditionally this is considered to be the 11th Upanishad, so none of the previous 10 Upanishads speak of devotion in such clear terms, even though of course the idea is extremely ancient. The most ancient sections of the Vedas are filled with devotional hymns, so devotion was always present. But the concept, the idea, as the philosophical idea of devotion, of supreme love, is for the first time being clearly expressed by him in the Upanishads. And for Krishna, this is the central theme in the Bhagavad Gita. The 12th chapter is all about bhakti, and the middle section of the Bhagavad Gita, which means from the 7th chapter and the 12th chapter, it's all about bhakti yoga, devotion as a means, supreme love as a means of that meditative union. The moment a person enters the 13th chapter of the Gita, the influence of this text becomes even more apparent. Not everybody of you might have seen the 13th chapter, but those of you who were present when we were studying the 13th chapter, which was last winter, here, if you remember, the 13th chapter is about the field and the knower of the field. the indwelling consciousness is spoken of as the knower of the field. This body, the mind, that is all like a field. And the indwelling consciousness is the knower of the field. Now this very idea, this very concept has been expressed in this Upanishad. So even before Krishna, we find this idea in the teachings of Śvetāśvatara. And not only this much, in fact, two of the verses in the 13th chapter are, what's the expression in Latin? Verbatim? How is it pronounced? Verbatim. Yeah, verbatim, which means word by word, literally quoted from this Upanishad into the 13th chapter. Really two verses as they are without changing anything. Sarvatah panipadam tat sarvatokshishiro mukham sarvatah shrutimaloke sarvamavritya tishtati. I think it's somewhere around the 15th, 16th, 17th verses of the 13th chapter. These two verses. Which, sorry? No, they are not here. Because it's in the 6th chapter. And this one at the moment is only till the 9th verse of the 1st chapter. We will, as soon as these papers are finished, we will have the complete first chapter. And at least the 1st chapter in front of us. But otherwise they are in the 6th chapter. The 6th chapter from this Upanishad, two verses from the 6th chapter of this Upanishad have been quoted in the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. So this really shows how, because the datings that I have been talking about, they were according to modern scholarship, but traditionally the dating of Krishna is around 5,500 years ago. That's approximately the Mahabharata period. And so that tells us that even if in its present form the Upanishad was composed and shows influence of the style of Sanskrit as it was 300 years before Christ, hence the modern dating, the concepts and the ideas and the teaching is extremely, extremely ancient. That's what it tells us. So now with this, we can get into the 1st chapter and we can actually start studying the 1st verse. But before that, if you remember when I was talking about the 1st chapter in a nutshell, what I said was the 1st chapter is about self-realization. So the very theme of self-realization. What does self-realization? In Sanskrit, it is Atma Vidya. Atma Vidya, Atma Jnana. These are the Sanskrit words. But when you hear self-realization, what comes to your mind? That is what I would be interested in hearing. What does it bring to your mind? Anybody would like to say something? When you hear this word, what does self-realization mean to you? How would you explain it? I'm asking a question. Yes.
Related from the concept of form, even of non-form, of form and void.
Yes.
And maybe
Yes, yes, yes. So, self-realization as realizing the individual self as the universal self. I'm just paraphrasing you. And and because I think everybody could not hear you, that's why. And yes, freeing oneself from the concept of self, no self. That's also what you said, beautiful, because I think when we speak of self-realization as realizing the true nature of the self, then ultimately it's about breaking through all the limited concepts that we have. Any other thoughts? Yes? Waking up from a dream. Waking up, self-realization, waking up from a dream. Yes, beautiful. That's, that's what Mandukya Upanishad is all about. Yeah. I think that's basically what we will be studying in this first chapter, because the first chapter is about that realization, and it's not only knowledge, but it is really the experience, the living experience, and that's where the difference between conceptual understanding and between the actual experience comes. When it comes to conceptual understandings, then I think, particularly when we look at different words, so for example, kaivalya, solitude of yoga, mukti, because you were talking about these concepts. Mukti in Advaita Vedanta, complete freedom of Advaita Vedanta. And similar concepts exist in all the different mystical traditions, spiritual traditions of India, whether it is, for example, nirvana in the Buddha's teachings, or even the other day, I don't know if he's here today, he asked me, it was a strange question to be asked about Rigpa. Were you here? No, I don't think the person is not here anymore, they must have left, but a young boy, he asked me, at the end of my class, can this yoga practice, Iyengar yoga, lead to Rigpa? It's yes, Tibetan Rigpa, Dzogchen, yes. He must be a Dzogchen practitioner, so that's why. And right now, Ati Yoga Dzogchen is so popular. So it's a difficult question to answer, because on one side, from an experiential, if we are talking about the experience, then I don't see much difference between the deepest experience of all these different wisdom traditions, spiritual traditions. But if you look at the philosophical presentation within all these different systems and how those terms have been defined, then at best I can say that they are overlapping, but I'm not sure, and first of all, I'm not an authority of Tibetan Buddhism, so it's very difficult for me to compare. But from what I read, and I read mostly in English, always in English when it comes to Tibetan Buddhism, and when I come across Tibetan words, then I don't understand much, but unless the Sanskrit counterpart, the traditional Sanskrit counterpart, is given. And in this case, whenever I come across the word Rigpa, then the Sanskrit counterpart usually is given Vidya. Vidya. So Vidya is the same word that we see here. And the opposite of Rigpa is Marigpa, which is Avidya, which is again the word that is used also in Advaita Vedanta. So there are tremendous similarities. There are certainly tremendous similarities. For example, Dzogchen, I think the very foundational idea of all the practices in Hatha Yoga is to understand the separation of Rigpa from the Chitta, from the grasping mind. And that is again the same in Advaita Vedanta, where we call it Drigdrishya Viveka, the discrimination between the seer and the seen. It is the same in Patanjali's teachings, Viveka Khyati, he uses. So all these different words are used. And not only that, when I look at the descriptions of Rigpa, for example, in Tibetan Buddhism, I straight away words from the Upanishads, their counterpart, Sanskrit words from the Upanishads, come up into my mind. So yes, all these, they are tremendously similar, yet at best I would still say, because it's a deep philosophy, at the same time there is also a deep philosophical representation, philosophical explanation behind all of that. And if everything is the same about that, I'm not very sure. But that's what philosophers do. You know, philosophers create distinctions. But on the experiential level, I can very much believe that everybody is having the same experience, because there are no possibilities. Either you would say that the yogic experience is fake and only one of these is true, all others are not true, or all of them are having the same experience but expressing it in slightly different words and slightly different concepts, which at best are overlapping, if not really the same. And what I mean by overlapping is what I thought of that day when I was writing a message to you. You know, vegetarian, vegan, Vaishnava, and Jaina. Vaishnava and Jaina maybe non-Indians won't understand, but they are all vegetarians because none of them eats meat. But yet they are not the same. They are at best overlapping concepts. Vegetarians are those who don't eat meat, they just eat vegetables. But you can also have extreme vegetarians that maybe eat eggs, unfertilized eggs. I know even vegetarians who say they are vegetarians, but yes, they just eat fish. Pescatarians. One of my father's teachers in Banaras was a great scholar, but he was from Mithila, from Bihar, where Brahmins have the tendency of eating fish. So whenever he used to go to take bath in the Ganga, on his way back he used to buy a fish and carry it. So one day my father asked him, "Sir, but why do you eat fish?" He said, "This is just water gherkin." Water gherkin. Gherkin is a vegetable. You know, so it's just moving in the water. That's all. It's not meat. So those are also vegetarians. Then are vegans. Vegans don't even drink milk. They are vegetarians, plus they don't consume any milk products, honey, etc. So that's vegan. Jainas, they are vegetarians, but they don't eat any roots, which means no onion, garlic, but not only no onion and garlic, but no root, even not potato, sweet potato, or carrots, or anything of this type. So that's vegetarian Jaina. And then you have Vaishnavas, who are vegetarians. They consume milk, they will take honey, but they will not eat onion and garlic. And they will not drink tea, they will not drink coffee, they will not, all these things. Also, they will not drink liquor. Yes, that is totally avoided. So now, all are vegetarians, and so, but still they are somehow overlapping concepts. And so for me, for example, when I travel on an aeroplane, which food to select? Vegetarian, still onion and garlic. Vegan, still onion and garlic. I try to avoid it to the best of my capacity. If I take Jain, then it still has milk products, which I also try to avoid. So for me, there is no perfect category in any aeroplane. So that's just to show the kind of problem that one has with these concepts, with all these different ideas. That's all. But ultimately, it's about being vegetarian. It's about leading a life of non-violence, trying to lead a lifestyle which is sustainable and which does not require to inflict suffering, any kind of suffering, on other living beings, at least those who are capable of suffering. So that's the idea. In the same way here, when it comes to the experience, I think there is tremendous similarity, but the way sometimes the concepts are presented, there is difference. So here, the idea is Atma-vidya, which means self-realization. Today morning, something very funny happened. I was visited by a new visitor. I get visited by different visitors. Last time it was a scorpion when I was practicing. Today morning, suddenly, because my first asanas I did without a mat, and then I pulled out my mat and then put my mat on the ground. As I opened it, there was a small bat. Bat sitting in it. Bat. It was in the mat. And the moment I saw this bat, I thought, okay, let it be here. I think it was a little bit shocked. So after seeing me, and it just decided to remain there on the mat, and I tried to remove it, but it was not ready to go away. So it was just there. I thought, okay, let me try to do my yoga with it on the mat. And the first thing that came to my mind is that famous paper by Thomas Nagel, What is it like to be a bat? Which is, the title is a very simple title, but it was one of the most influential papers written by a philosopher, which really brought to the forefront the problems of consciousness into modern thinking. And that's why the books that I read on consciousness always quote it, always speak of this paper. Then I thought there is no way. All the time I was today thinking, which I'm not supposed to during my practice, but I was thinking that what is it really like to be? There is no way for me to know how this creature experiences the world through supersonic sound, because it doesn't, instead of seeing through its eyes, it sees through speech. But it sees because its mind really, it seems that it interprets that information as an image through which, that's why it can see a darkness. And that's very interesting because the Upanishads speak of different types of lights accessible to the human being, and one of them is also speech. And in fact, you can, to a great extent, some blind people have been able to perfect their sense of echolocation. And with the help of that, they are able to ride a bicycle. A blind person can ride a bicycle if they are allowed to ride it in a completely dark place. A completely peaceful place. Then they would, by the sound and by the echo of this sound coming from the trees and the things. They can, in fact, like a bat, they can locate and they can drive bicycles. It's quite well known. So there is no way for me to know how this bat in front of me sees the world through supersonic sound. But one thing I'm sure, that if he starts practicing Vedanta, if he would, this back, he or she, whatever she was or he was, if she would have the capacity to sit down in meditation and start distancing oneself from its object, from his or her objects of perception, that doesn't matter whether that perception is through the eyes or through supersonic sound, ultrasonic sound, or whatever it is called, that perception, if he would be grounded in the perceiver, in the one having the perception, then I think he too would come precisely to the same conclusion. And that is what this Atma Vidya is about. So the first chapter, the whole chapter, in a nutshell, this is really the subject matter, but what the teacher will say, it's not easy. A person, that's why he brings up the idea of tapas, which means hard work, effort, because like oil is there in every sesame seed, and butter is there in every drop of curd, water is there wherever you, in most places, wherever you dig deep into the ground, and fire is there in every fire stick, and yet all of them require tremendous effort to become manifest. In the same way, a practitioner of yoga needs to make some physical as well as psychological effort to make this reality apparent, visible, capable of being experienced. Oil is there in every sesame seed, but we don't experience it. For that, some effort is required. These are his, just listed, his examples that he will give. And it is then that he speaks of the physical body as the lower fire stick and meditation on Om as the higher fire stick, and rubbing both of them together in meditation is what produces this light. With this, we can now really look at the first chapter, first verse, which contains questions, which contains an inquiry that the format of this Upanishad is not that there is a group of students going to a teacher. There is no identified teacher here. The teacher is identified only at the end. And what is in fact happening, just let me try to picture. There is a group of scholars. They are identified here as Brahma-vādins. If you look at the first word, Om Brahma-vādino vadanti. Brahma-vādin. Brahma-vādin means those who speak of Brahman. And Brahman can mean two things. Brahman can mean the Vedic teachings. So in that sense, then Brahma-vādin means a scholar of the Vedas. And Brahman can also mean this true nature of the self, pure consciousness. Consciousness as it is, devoid of any object. When it has nothing to illuminate and therefore is not conditioned by that which is illuminated by it. Those who have experienced that and speak of that, they are also called Brahma-vādins. So Brahma-vādin is a term used for both scholars of the teachings, devoid of the experience, but also those who have actually experienced it and speak from their own experience. And here in this is just a group of such individuals coming together. None of them is a student, none of them is a teacher. A very different format. Because till now, in the previous 10 Upanishads, the format has always been, even if it was great scholars, they identified one teacher, they went to him. A wife goes to her husband. A son goes to her father. So always the teacher is identified in the very beginning. And here all that are identified is just a group of Brahma-vādins, that's all. And they are speaking to each other. It is only at the end of the discourse that somebody starts really standing out. And that is Śvetāśvatara, whose name is then mentioned at the very end. And most likely why he stands out? Because he was a yoga practitioner. Yoga practitioner in the sense that he had that experiential understanding. He was not speaking out of his scholarship, from the knowledge that he had received from his teachers only, but he was speaking out of his experience. And the masters always say, that it's also in the earlier Upanishads, the one who speaks, the one whose words are based in truth, he speaks above all. And what is meant is, when our words are based in truth, it means that it is based in our experience. Because the truth is how we experience it. If I say that there are 3 flowers lying next to the Ganga, the first question you will ask me, did you see it yourself? And when I say, yes, I saw it, then you will accept it as a truth because it is my experience. If I say, no, somebody else told me, then you would say, oh, somebody else. Then it's just second-hand knowledge. So the truth is that which we have experienced. And when a person speaks from his experience, if I have seen those 3 flowers there, then I'm absolutely sure. I can be absolutely sure, unless I was not dreaming, unless I was not hallucinating, unless, of course, there is always different possibilities out there, but most likely that's the greatest possibility of truth. Skepticism we should always be skeptic of our conclusions. We should always test them, because there is always a possibility of error in human understanding. Atma-vidya, yes, wonderful, but how have I understood it? Have I really understood it properly? But when it comes from experience, then it has tremendous weight. And that's why Patanjali in his teachings on yoga, when he talks about the results of leading a lifestyle that leads towards such realization, the result for him is tremendous inner strength, which is explained the capacity to inspire this realization in others. Because someone who has realized it himself or herself, only such a person can really inspire it, give it rise in the hearts of other beings. So I think that is from the teachings of Śvetāśvatara. What we find is that, because as I said, that he's in the chronology of all the ancient teachings of India, he seems to be, at least from the texts available to us, he's the first person ever to speak of asana, pranayama, the practice of yoga, very clearly in its very foundational terms, in its very basic terms. And so that's why I think he's speaking really from his own experience. So, But of course what we find, so that's the format I was speaking about, this format of the teaching, that originally it's not a group of people who have gone to a teacher, but it's a group of people who are trying to learn from each other. And that's also a beautiful way of learning. We don't always need to go to a teacher. Sometimes even if just a few friends come together, and if we talk to each other, then somebody else might know more in particular field in which we are more ignorant. So we can learn from that person in that field. I remember as a child when I was in the monastery in Kailas Ashram here, a very ancient monastery here in Rishikesh, really one of the most respected places to study Advaita Vedanta in North India. My teacher used to say that when he had come originally in the 50s and 60s to this ashram, what he used to see that all the different teachers, they used to sit in each other's classes. So, and then if a student would become a teacher, his teachers, when he was teaching, because there was only one classroom, so why to sit in my room out of the ego that I'm the big teacher? Let me just go and listen to my student. So they would also go and sit into the classes of their students. Everybody was studying from each other. So this is also a beautiful format, a format which, to my knowledge, is only where they are trying to, yes, in one place also, elsewhere also, in the Chandogya Upanishad, four friends come together and they start discussing with each other, and then one stands out. So yes, elsewhere also it is there. But here, really the whole Upanishad has been presented in that format. So they are asking each other some questions. And yes, these 5 questions. There are 5 questions in this first verse, just so you have an idea what these 5 questions are about, and then we can study the verse. The first question is in fact about the cause. The second question is about the origin. Cause and origin are very similar, but cause is more the cause of this entire existence, and origin as the origin of my body and mind, the very origin of this mind-body apparatus. So in that sense, so there is some similarity, some difference. The third question is about the sustainer, because if there is something from which I arose, then there is also a principle at work which sustains me, and then the absorber, the fourth question is about the absorber, and the fifth question is about, I can write it here, presider, the Lord. That's the fourth question. The fifth question. Let's read. Let's pronounce this first verse, and then we will read its translation, and then I will explain what. But you can see where the questions are in fact leading to. In fact, if you look at these 3 things, many people, there are creative individuals all around the world. And the word God, G-O-D, as generator, organizer, and destroyer. That is how sometimes. So from what do we arise, in what do we exist, and in what do we merge? But in fact, this is closest to the idea of God, not these three. But let me explain that. Let's first recite the first verse, which you have. Om Brahma-vādino vadanti kāraṇaṁ Brahma kutaḥ jātā jīvāma kena kvacha saṁpratiṣṭhāḥ Adhiṣṭhitāḥ kena sukhetareṣu vartāmahe brahmavido vyavasthāṁ. Om Brahma-vādino vadanti kāraṇaṁ brahma kutaḥ jātā jīvāma kena kvacha saṁpratiṣṭhāḥ Adhiṣṭhitāḥ kena sukhetareṣu vartāmahe brahmavido vyavasthāṁ. The translation is Om, those who discourse on Brahman, i.e. which means pure consciousness or the sacred teachings, say to each other, what is Brahman, the cause? From where are we born? So see, the first question, what is Brahman, the cause? From where are we born? By what do we live? It's about the sustainer. And into what do we merge? And then comes the last question. But before the last question, just see who they are addressing when they are asking questions, these questions. Not any particular person, but the entire group. So the entire group, everybody in the group is... So it's not a question maybe asked by one person. It's a question asked by different people to different people. And that's why look at how they are addressing. Oh, you who know Brahman. Now the problem here in the English translation is you cannot see that it's a plural form. In Sanskrit, Brahmavidaha is the plural form. So I think to show that it is the plural form, we should add all to that. Oh, you all who know Brahman. So clearly, all are being addressed. Not any particular sage, not any particular teacher. That's why I said that the format of this teaching is everybody is contributing. Śvetāśvatara, and that's why it is even very difficult to tell how much really is from Śvetāśvatara, because the question is asked to everybody, so different people are contributing. So, oh you all, will you add it? Yes. Oh you all who know Brahman, they are addressing the others, presided over, by whom do we live in pleasure and the other, which means in suffering, each in our respective situations. Why do we have to live in suffering? Why? What forces us into this suffering? No one wants to be in suffering, and yet everybody is bound to experience suffering in their lives. There is no life, no human as well as non-human life, which is completely free from suffering. So what is it which is forcing us into situations that we would not like to be in? Okay. Now, these questions have to be explained a little bit more. First of all, so we'll discuss this a little bit more. Om Brahma-vādino vadanti. Yes, the Brahma-vādins, they discourse, they say, who speak of Brahman. And most likely, the ones who were mere scholars, because they would have been the ones, they have heard a lot about Brahman, but they don't fully understand what it really is. It still doesn't make sense, experiential sense to them. As a scholar, you know the concept, but then since you have not experienced it, still something seems lacking. And that is when, that depends. If your scholarship leads you into a false understanding of knowing the truth, which sometimes does happen with scholars, and that this is really the pitfall of scholarship, that merely by looking at the map of a country and reading all about the country, and then realizing that you might even know more about their country than the people coming from that country because they have not traveled so much. So maybe you know more about someone coming from that country because that person has experienced their country but not the whole country, and you have read so much. If you start to live in an imagination that that's it, now I know even more than an American who comes from America because I've read everything about America. I've looked carefully at the Google map, at everything, and I've just seen everything. It's still, something is lacking. That will remain absent till we take the ticket and we actually fly and touch the ground there. It will never be the same. The same thing is true. So there might be great scholars. On one side you have Ramana Maharshi, Ananda Mahima, these great saints who were not scholars. All they spoke was the Upanishads. They had not studied them. Ananda Mahima didn't even know how to write her name. But most likely Ramana Maharshi also. He was completely. And yet, so if a scholar goes to them, then he might think that if he is a true scholar, then he will bow down like many of the scholars used to do in front of these masters. But some scholars who have that pride, who think that I know more than they do because they have read more, then for them there is no hope left. Sadly, they are in a hopeless situation. They are happy with their maps and books on America. So, but these scholars, these Brahma-vādins are the ones who realize their limitation, and that's why they want to know more. They have read a lot about Brahman. The teachings are filled about Brahman. But what it is it? How to experience it? That experiential understanding is lacking. And that's why this first question, Kim kāraṇaṁ Brahma? What is this Brahman? We have read so much about it. We are Brahma-vādins. This Upanishad, the Vedas, they are referred to as logos. Really, the Christian word logos, the word of God, or God as word, that supreme principle as word. That's what we refer. That's how we refer to the Vedas. Brahman in the form of speech, Brahman in the form of knowledge, Brahman in the form of words. And yet, where is the experience? The experience is lacking. That's the problem. Brahman is an interesting word. Brahman. Brahman is an interesting word because it means that which constantly increases, or the most increased one. If everything would increase and beyond which it cannot increase, in that sense, that is the biggest, the greatest. But the root means in fact to increase, to expand. So that which expands and that which makes everything else increase and expand. This is the very literal grammatical meaning of the word Brahman. Interestingly, and now I'm not speaking about the concepts and the similarity of concepts, even though even in the concepts there is tremendous similarity, but grammatically speaking, the Buddha's word, which is used, I think, most likely for the first time by the Buddha, because the word is not used in the Upanishads. It's only used in the Upanishads that came after the Buddha, which is the famous word for empty, shunya, which was then later expounded into a philosophical doctrine by Nagarjuna in his teachings of Madhyamaka Karika, with which the Advaita Vedanta concept of Brahman has tremendous similarity. Again, overlapping. I'm just talking about, there are also tremendous differences, but there are also tremendous similarities. But just if you look at the words in Sanskrit language, in fact, they really, linguistically, grammatically, they really mean the same thing. Why? Because the root of shunya in Sanskrit is shvi. Shvi. Shvi means also to expand. If you look at the grammarian Patanjali, Panini, on whom Patanjali had written a commentary in 200 BC, Panini was a little bit, some scholars believe that he was a little bit before the Buddha, some scholars believe that he was a little bit after the Buddha, approximately at the same time of the Buddha. And he standardized Sanskrit. Sanskrit before him is known as the Vedic ancient Sanskrit, and his grammar produced what we today refer to as the classical Sanskrit, bound by his principles. And that Sanskrit has not changed in the last 2,300 years. If I speak today, if I would be speaking Sanskrit in my daily life, I would be speaking the same Paninian Sanskrit. He had tremendous influence on Sanskrit. So when he gives the meanings of both roots, he gives the same meaning, vriddhi. Vriddhi, which means to expand, to increase, to become bigger. So just even from the word, from the perspective of the word, there is tremendous similarity between these two words. So Brahman means that which increases, which expands, and yes. What is, sorry?
Actually, in Greek.
In Greek, yes.
The word exists, I forget the exact root, but the word to exist, the root meaning is to stand out from.
To stand out from.
So what
Okay.
stands out? All thoughts.
Our thoughts. Yes.
All
Yes.
perceptions.
Yes.
They stand
They stand out.
Stand
Yes.
out from what? Shunya.
Yes, from Shunya.
So that
Yes.
knowledge is there in the Greek.
Is there in the Greek as well? Yes.
That
Yes.
stands, everything that arises stands out from
Yes.
them.
From. Yes. 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 Aldous Huxley says something very beautiful, that often language is wiser and contains more knowledge in it than those who actually speak it. And he gives many examples. I'm forgetting those examples now. But for example, what is dvividha? Can anybody help me with this? What is dvividha in English? Dvividha. Forgetting that English. Not dilemma. No. Forget it. It's okay. No problem. He gave some certain words by which he in the perennial philosophy. It's a very interesting discussion. In any case, that's the reason I love to look at words sometimes, because there is so much hidden in these words sometimes. This first question, that those who discourse, what is Brahman, the cause? Now I think let us discuss this in our next session, because the time is over. So we'll start discussing this mantra in our next session. Any questions, any observations? Any thoughts? For what, sir? Yeah. No. There are two different roots, two very different roots. The root of Brahman is brih, and the root of shunya is shvi. But the meaning of both roots is the same. The roots are totally different, but the meaning that Panini gives to both roots, brimhi vriddhau, brimha means to increase, and shvi, tuoshvi, gati vriddhyoh. Tuoshvi, shvi also means to go, and shvi also means to increase, to expand. So both meanings, both roots, they are two different roots, but the meaning that he gives, that Panini gives, is exactly the same. Yes. So grammatically, just simply, I'm talking about the derivation. Any other? Okay. Sad. Yes. No, the bat must have come overnight, and then it must have found a place in my yoga mat. The bat finds a place in the mat, and then as I opened it, he felt disturbed, terribly disturbed. First of all, he or she was peacefully sitting there, but then I decided not to remove my mat and just leave it after my little bit of practice today was finished. And after a while, he started flying here and there, but he would not go out. And I think they are a little bit frightened to go out during the day because of the crows who usually eat them. So he was just flying around. Then he went into one room, which is not frequent, which is not used by us. So I decided to close the door of that room. So now he's peacefully in the room. Before I came down, I could not see him anywhere, so he must have found a place in that room. As soon as it becomes evening, around 5, I will open the door, and then hopefully, as is the nature of the bats, that they go out the moment at dusk, they go out, so hopefully he will leave. But it's a very first time I've seen this type of bat. To me it seemed a little bit like a blood-sucking one with its mouth. I don't know, I'm not sure. But the ones that I have seen earlier were really more like, because we have bats, sometimes they fall into the house because of the rain or something. And I've always seen them, and they looked always like dogs, like a puppy, or like a chuha, like a mouse on wings. But this one had a very flat face, really as if pressed, the nose and everything pressed into the mouth, into the face, really pressed into the face, and very, very strange, and a very straight face, not sticking out like this, but really face. I didn't have the time to look up on the internet, but I suspect that it's one of those blood-sucking ones that usually you see. So I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not a zoologist. But he's safe up there for the time being. Resting, sleeping. Sorry? Yeah, looking at some maps. Okay, let us conclude the prayer for universal well-being. Sarve bhavantu sukhinah, sarve santu niramayah, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet. Om Shantihi, Shantihi, Shantihi. My humble salutations to you.